Are you a healthcare professional looking for a trusted concussion resource? Then you've come to the right place. From her New York City studios, welcome to Concussion Corner with your host, Dr. Jessica Schwartz.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Did you know that sport helmets are rated on a 5-star system similar to cars? And the safest helmets have nothing to do with price, brand, or availability? Since 2011, Virginia Tech researchers have been providing unbiased helmet ratings that allow consumers to make informed decisions when purchasing helmets. The helmet ratings are the culmination of over a decade of research identifying which helmets best reduce concussion risk. This work is done as part of Virginia Tech's service mission and is 100% independent of any funding or influence from helmet manufacturers. Our mission at Concussion Corner is to expose you, the listener, to trusted spaces in the concussion arena that translate to clinic next day. Please visit the Virginia Tech Helmet Lab website in our show notes or at bit.ly/Virginia Tech Helmets and spread the word to aid in lowering concussion risk in your community. Thank you for tuning in, and let's begin the show. Welcome to Season 4 of Concussion Corner. My name is Dr. Jessica Schwartz, and I'm so thrilled to have Dr. Kelsey Bryk back with us from Canada. Dr. Bryk is a proud Canadian who recently completed her PhD at the University of Delaware. She has been interested in the brain since she was 16 and became interested in concussions after watching professional hockey and suffering from a few concussions herself playing soccer. She subsequently went on to complete a bachelor's with honors and a master's on concussion research. Her dissertation research examined the neurophysiological health of adults over the age of 25 who suffer from persistent concussion symptoms by using various high-tech and clinically feasible objective measures. Kelsey, welcome back to Concussion Corner.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's, we left folks hanging on the edge of their seats waiting to hear what your dissertation found and all that stuff. So, I'm thrilled to have you back. And again, for folks that are just tuning in, there is a part 1 to Dr. Bryk's podcast here on Concussion Corner. And Kelsey's dissertation she recently just defended at the University of Delaware was entitled "The Effects of Persistent Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Symptoms on the Neurophysiological Health of Adults." So Kelsey, we reviewed that your population base was between 25 and 65. You had the beautiful setup, and that's a theme this March Brain Injury Awareness Month, that you had controls. And historically in concussion research, we just haven't had controls, and we've had really small ends. So kudos to you for having controls and setting up that research well for future people to either replicate or build upon. And you were using the kin arm and some force plates and in your motion capture lab, and we're looking at single and dual tasking in terms of the conditions that you were measuring in your 2 days of measurements. Your instruments that you use in day 2 were the King Divic, the VOMs, and the what was the last one you had?
Clinical reaction time.
The clinical reaction time, and then you had the trail making test as well. So again, that kind of summarizes a little bit of part 1. Again, we'll have the link to show part 1 in the show notes here, as well as with Kelsey's information. But yeah, let's just hop right into it and talk about what you found and what you were actually kind of seeing as you were even just collecting this data with this persistent symptom patient population.
So I'll start. So aim 1, I had the 2 aims. So aim 1 was really that motion capture stuff that you briefly mentioned there. And so again, we were looking at not just how people walked in terms of single task and dual task, but also how they initiated their gait. Because there's a little bit of research on that in the concussion world nowadays. And so essentially, what we found was there really wasn't that, so when they did the dual task condition compared to single task, both groups of individuals slowed down. PCS patients slowed down more. They had a shorter step length. And so these were kind of, I would say, the more expected results, because we know that just in general, when people are dual tasking, especially walking and talking, anyone and everyone tends to slow down. It was just that we saw, PCS patients slow down more than the control subjects. And so that was really the only thing we saw in terms of the how I phrased it was steady state gait. So they were just walking. They actually started outside of where the motion capture cameras could see them. So they were just walking their normal pace through our lab. But where we really did see some differences for this specific aim was actually in the gait initiation. And so a lot of our results sort of reflected this conservative gait strategy that we see in post-concussion, especially acutely, which is pretty much where all the research in this area has focused up until now. And so what we saw, so we looked at gait initiation, and the sort of, there's 3 different phases of gait initiation. And so we just really looked at, honed in on the first phase. And so real brief, what that is let's say you're going to take off, or you're going to start your gait by taking your right leg off of the ground. What happens is before you even start moving that leg, you shift your weight over to the right hand side a little bit before you actually shift your weight over to the left hand side to take that right leg off the ground. And so what we looked at was essentially the displacement and velocity of that first phase of when you've shifted over to that right foot. And so essentially what we found was the PCS and control patients both showed a decrease in the dual task gait initiation condition versus the single task gait initiation. But again, same trend as I mentioned before, the PCS patients showed a greater reduction in displacement and velocity. And so again, this goes back to sort of that conservative gait strategy I mentioned, where people are essentially keeping they're keeping their balance or their center of mass close to their center of pressure. They're not, swaying out as much as, you or I might. And then we actually looked at the separation between center of mass and center of pressure. So again, this is near the end of gait initiation, where basically let's say we're taking off with that right foot again. So you've essentially already taken that right foot off the ground, and now it's moving forward. Your center of pressure is still under that left foot that's still on the ground, but now your center of mass has started to move forward. And so you have this separation where, when you went from standing, your center of mass was essentially in and around, but over top of your center of pressure. Now that when you progress forward, your center of mass is starting to move forward. So we wanted to look at, that separation, both like in anterior, posterior, front to back, and then medial lateral or side to side. And so, what we've seen in the literature, especially acutely post-concussion, is that this separation is reduced in people with a concussion. And so again, that goes back to that conservative gait strategy. They're not sort of letting their center of mass sway too much outside of their base of support to essentially prevent any falling. It kind of comes back to their fall risk. And so again, we looked at this separation, and and what I should mention is, in the literature, what's typically been reported is the anterior, posterior, and medial lateral displacements are reported separately. What we actually did is we recorded those two, but then we found the resultant just using Pythagorean theorem. And so that's what I was reporting. And for this center of mass, center of pressure separation, basically what we found is that the controls didn't really change between the dual task and single task conditions. That separation essentially stayed the same. But the PCS patients had a significant reduction. So again, I just mentioned that we see that acutely post-concussion. So now these chronic individuals are sort of showing the same conservative gait strategy, or that reduction in the separation. Again, to keep their center of mass over their base of support so that they don't fall. And so that, and I guess the additional piece to this aim was the cognitive side of things. So we also looked at, cognitive accuracy, verbal reaction time, different things like that. And we essentially found nothing across the board. There was really no change. We had 4 different cognitive tasks. So we had the visual Stroop, the classic, like you see the word red in red and you have to, or the word red in blue ink and you have to identify the ink color. We did kind of the auditory version of that where they had a headset and they heard the word high or the word low in a high or low pitch. They had to identify the pitch. For both of those, for both PCS patients and controls, they were essentially in and around the 0% change mark. There was really no difference between their single and dual task cognitive performance. We also did verbal fluency. So I showed a letter on a TV screen, had them list as many words as possible for either while they were standing or while they were walking. That significantly decreased in the dual task condition, but for both groups. So that we were looking at dual task cost. And so those dual task costs did not change between groups. They both, I guess, their performance was reduced, essentially the same. The one cognitive variable that we did find a group difference for was the cognitive accuracy and working memory. And so if you're familiar with sort of the dual task gate acute post-concussion literature, this is a very commonly used cognitive assessment. And so what it is, for those who don't know, is you have participants either spell words backwards or 5-letter words, subtract by 6s or 7s from a number between, I think, 70 and 99. And you have them list the months in reverse order. And so what we saw here was that the controls had 0% change essentially. But the PCS patients had a change of, almost -20, I believe. And so this was a significant difference. So the PCS patients were more affected by this working memory test in the dual task condition than the controls were. The controls really weren't affected very much. They could perform with the same, cognitive accuracy in both single and dual task. But the PCS patients really struggled with this one. So it's kind of interesting overall for this AIM-1 where, we didn't really see gait differences, but we saw gait initiation differences. And then just the cognitive accuracy of working memory. And so collectively, the way we kind of explained this part of it was that, gait initiation is known to be a little bit basically more cognitively challenging. It requires more cognitive input. And so when we pair that up with cognitive tasks, there's kind of a competition between cognitive resources to not only perform, let's say, working memory, but also start walking. Whereas when you're already walking, it's not as challenging. And so it seems that, there's less cognitive resources for these PCS patients to be able to perform these cognitively challenging tasks at the same time. Or, their brain is just it's not functioning in a normal way. They're not able to process both things at the same time. So we kind of thought that was really interesting. And that really gave us a lot of, objective measures that, it's a high-tech motion capture lab. I know it's not very clinically feasible, but this was really able to tap into a lot of just objectively assessed measures that, kind of say like, yes, these people are having issues with dual tasking, with walking and talking. And it's I don't know, to me, it's just very important because we do that every day. Like, I'm sure, yeah, we walk around, looking at our phones, talking to a friend while we're walking. So
Yeah, and I sent you a note in the chat too, and I'm just going to bring up, we've had, David Howell, and we've had Rob Linnell and or Lionel, and we've had Christina Master, and it's so fascinating to like kind of like be here, kind of inputting all of this like I forgot the movie, but it's like that famous GIF that you're like when you're confused and you're putting together all this like high level physics equations in your head, and that's kind of me here, being like, wow, this is so great to see and hear, and your findings. Rob Lionel looks at, they're finding up to 80% of folks within the first year having an ACL or ankle injury, which are significant public health concerns from a musculoskeletal. I've been talking to my Australian counterparts too much. The musculoskeletal system. If we're looking at some of Dr. Master's work out of CHOP, she's finding things with uh, you know, resource issues with oxygen and uptake. So essentially not getting enough fuel, which is, again, explains like why these kids at like 11 a.m. in school are having behavioral issues, because like, hello, I mean, have you been hangry? Have have you done a PhD
Exactly.
and pulled an all-nighter and not slept enough,
Yep.
all of these things. So, and then who else did I mention? Rob Lionel. Oh, and then David Howe looking at dual tasking. Over in Colorado. So again, putting all of this together and then just seeing your work, again, having this delay in gait initiation. If you think about watching the Olympics, which I'm so sorry we didn't have these Tokyo Olympics,
I know.
in 2020, and I hope we can get something to safely happen in 2021, even if it's without an audience. But these athletes really spend their life, and just to give a shout out to Megan Musnicki, who is an Ithaca College alum, 2005. I just aged myself, but she's the only Division III athlete, and she's been, she's got she has London and Brazil so 2012, 2016 gold medals, and then a ton of world championships, and she's usually in the middle of that crew boat. But it's so cool to see. She was going to retire, and then she was supposed to show up in Tokyo again. So all of these athletes, either at the beginning of their career or at the tail end of their career, you just hope that 2021 happens for them. But anyway, I digress. So, just looking at all of this, and again, thinking of those Olympic moments, you're watching Michael Phelps, you're watching the Megan Musnickis and the crew team, and they're in hundredths and thousands of seconds between a medal. Whether that being gold or silver or bronze or even fourth place, which is the dreaded thing. Although psychologically, I know the bronze has a lot of psychological weighting for folks as well. But or actually silver. Actually, people are more grateful that they got the bronze, and then the silver, like, oh, they were so close. But just keeping into that connection, that emotional connection we have watching the Olympics, no matter what country you're from. Again, we're in over 40 countries here at Concussion Corner, so I don't want to just discuss our American our Olympians, but just thinking like, okay, well, if we are initiating gait, what was it, hundredths or thousandths or tenths of a second? What were your findings? Just generally, the delay.
So we weren't actually looking at the delay. It was just sort of like the displacement and velocity that was happening in that one little phase of gait initiation.
Yes. Yeah, so you can just imagine clinically how this is going to be most likely imperceivable, which is why, we can't just go by clinical, return. And if we could have some kind of neurophysiological measurements, and again, not everyone can have a force plate, but maybe we could have a Wii adapted or some kind of technologically adapted thing to kind of show these slight delays. Because again, if you're having problems cognitively processing a call, blue 42, hike, and then all of a sudden you're like a tenth of a second off. Well, that's a difference between a potential second concussion or another concussion or another a musculoskeletal injury. So again, this work is so interesting. And again, a lot of stuff that we've seen, with Parkinson's work, with step length, and kind of brain areas fighting for resource, and initiation. So it's interesting to kind of see, this work kind of come to fruition with concussion and persistent MTBI concussion patients. So very, very cool work.
Thank you.
So, what do you hope to see for the future? What do you potentially, do you want to kind of stick with this patient population? Is there any limitations that you found with your dissertation that you would like to maybe clean up for something in the future?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, because a lot of this data collection happened during the pandemic, we had a real low sample size, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So, I mean, to me, I would love to just continue what I did, especially, with this motion capture stuff, but then also pairing it with, some questionnaires and the clinical assessments that I mentioned too is, those are things that can be used in the clinical world. And we did see differences in those as well. So, I mean, at the end of the day, this is just the very beginning in terms of showing, um, I guess, just I hate to use the word prove in the research world, but proving that these people are going through something beyond just their symptoms.
Hmm.
And that something else actually is going on. Because again, it's an invisible injury. And so the more of this data that's out there, um, it's really important for researchers and clinicians to be aware that there is something going on with these individuals. It's not just they're sitting there and they have a migraine and they've had a migraine for 6 months. There's quite likely something else going on, which just sort of reinforces the fact that you know maybe we need sort of, and this actually came up in my defense presentation, but just sort of taking kind of a global approach to assessing these individuals, but then really taking the data from that and being able to individualize the treatment or the rehab protocols. I think that's a huge thing on top of, just my results validating these individuals saying, yeah, they're going through something. Okay, now let's use all these tools that we have and figure out what specifically is wrong with this individual, because it's not going to be the same as the last 5 people I saw.
Right.
Everyone's so different. And so that's why I say, taking this sort of global approach and just kind of looking at how effective that is, and moving forward, looking at how effective all these different individualized rehab programs are. Because I think that's where um, a lot of us know that we need to go. We just don't have a lot of research to back it up right now. It's such an up and coming area that I would kind of love to dive into. So.
Yeah, and as a clinician, again, I got hopped up into talking about all of the things, the deficits and the evaluation processes and
Mhm.
intervention processes and referral processes and all of the history of concussion. And I have to remind myself to kind of come back to reminding the audience that the number one thing we can do as clinicians, in my opinion, is validate the patient's symptom profile,
Mhm.
because again, a lot of these folks with persistent symptoms think that they're going crazy, and I don't use that term lightly. It's a subjective that you hear often. I don't understand. I can't go to the mall. I can't go to the supermarket. I yell at my kid because they're so neurofatigued by
Yeah.
2, 3 o'clock, and they're not meaning to be that person.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
again, these injuries of concussion change the person's I am. We can go back to
Yeah.
Freud and all of the other research from 100 years ago, but your I am is essentially, everything that you are, and it's not supposed to be too literal, but I mean, you are a thoracic surgeon, you are mother, daughter, wife, husband, funny.
Mhm.
Concussion challenges everything that you encompass.
Mhm.
So by validating the patient's symptom profile clinically is the number one thing that we can do by doing comprehensive targeted examinations on these folks.
Mhm.
But then bringing in your work and your research, I think really, sets up this future for success, because if we can find neurophysiological things that we can identify outside of clinic that may provide rationale for that person not going back to the line or that
Mhm.
person going back to that line. And it's not just about taking away, it's about providing things back to folks, but that they're doing it safely and not putting themselves or others at risk for injury. Like, I do not want someone driving an 18-wheeler, with reaction time, dual tasking issues.
Yeah.
So again, I've seen that on the other end. A lot of folks don't know this about me, but I worked in the amputee population, the limb length discrepancy world, or differences as they like to call it, as well. And, again, working with someone here at a major tri-state area factory and actually lost his arm because of an issue like this. So if we can prevent anything from the future from happening, but also restoring some normalcy back to folks' lives
Mhm.
by validating their symptom profile clinically, and then if we can do that neurophysiologically by picking up on these tacit uh, clinically immeasurable things, just with the naked eye, I think just brings so much power to, again, validating these persistent symptom concussion patients and MTBI patients, again, because everyone does not transiently recover within 14 to 21 or 28 days, depending on what
Mhm.
article that you're reading. So again, really, really good job and kudos. And, I know the audience hears it in my voice that I'm that excited to hear about your dissertation and talk about it on the radio of 2021, right? A
Yeah.
podcast. But really, I hope that your future really brings, this topic to light. I hope people get, interested in it, want to fund you, want to do research and postdoc with you. And then, hopefully if you move into professorship, you can encourage, other fledgling young pre-PhDs to kind of pick up on the work. But really good job. And thank you again so much for doing all that you've done or
Thank you
do.
so much.
Yeah. So, in terms of where do you see yourself, for future, do you want to be teaching? Do you want to be working with clinicians? What's an ideal setup for you?
That is a great question that I don't have a great answer for.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still sort of in this, mindset that I love the research side of things, and
Hmm.
it's so, you just took the words out of my mouth. It's so critically important to validate these people's persistent symptoms and that they're actually going through something. At the same time, I find myself getting slightly frustrated with the disconnect between the research and the clinical world.
Yeah.
And I think people who are more involved in the rehabilitation are probably arguably more up to date on sort of how, like, what do we do about a concussion,
Hmm.
um, especially the persistent side of it. But it's kind of the more, for me, it's also the immediate assessment, and how can we identify people who may have prolonged injuries at the time of injury, or whenever they present to their physician, their family physician. And so for me also, I'm kind of very interested in the clinical world, and just, whether that be working with clinicians or becoming a clinician myself, I don't know.
Hmm.
But I think it's hugely important that you know this is research that clinicians need to be aware of, and just doing more of it and having relationships with clinicians. I don't know if that means a professorship down the road, or where that's going to take me. But that is in general what I would sort of love to be doing, 5, 10, 20 years from now. So
Awesome. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for coming on. Where can folks find you on social media and, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever your platforms you're using?
mhm. Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, just under my name, Kelsey Bryk, Bryk is the last name, and then sort of a play on my last name. I'm also active on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is at She's a Brick House.
Yes, and again, you have won all of the Twitter handle awards for Concussion Corner. I do not have a trophy or a plaque, but
Ah, shoot.
right now, at least as of yet. So if you get something in the mail in Winnipeg, you will know where it came from. But
Perfect.
yeah, that's awesome. And we'll leave all the notes in the show notes. In the notes for Dr. Bryk's contact information. And again, remember, guys, it is Brain Injury Awareness Month. Thank you so much for tuning in and tuning back with us. We took a hiatus in 2020. I don't want to say for obvious reasons, but we all kind of went through quite a bit. And here in New York City, you can imagine what was going on here for me and a lot of my family and team and colleagues. So in the spirit of, coming together. We appreciate a 5-star rating for everyone. If people can just kind of hop onto their podcast app, and literally it takes less than 30 seconds, hit us up with 5 stars, leave a review if you like, and that takes more time and it can be more thoughtful. But that 5-star review really helps us grow. And I really encourage, in the spirit of FOAMed, which is free open access medical education, each of these podcasts takes 5 to 6 hours to record, produce, and post and upload. So if you can just share this with 1 or 2 colleagues and just try to get the good information out there to folks. Again, the more conversations we can have, hopefully we can translate this knowledge into clinic next day and start asking the questions and hopefully getting folks like, Dr. Bryk and all the folks that come on to Concussion Corner funding and, and really inspiration to get these guys working so we can promote their research, which you see takes years and years, to get one topic out. So Kelsey, again, thanks so much for coming on. And in the spirit of Brain Injury Awareness Month, the hashtag is Not Alone in Brain Injury. So thanks for not leaving me alone on this podcast and talking about all of your good work. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Concussion Corner, hosted by Dr. Jessica Schwartz. The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and not to be used as personal medical advice. Don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Concussion Corner.